This podcast is music history, education, and commentary. Some coarse language is used and adult topics are sometimes discussed. It may not be appropriate for young children. Welcome to Rock and Roll Archaeology from Pantheon Media with your host, Christian Swain. Digging into music, culture, and technology. Past, present, and future. And now, on with the show.
Hello, friends. Christian Swain here. Before we begin, a brief note. The episode that follows is a special edition of Rock and Roll Archaeology. It is a detailed account of the events of December 8th, 1980, in the immediate aftermath. It is presented without our usual formatting and without any mid-roll commercials. A warning, it contains descriptions of violence. It is a dark and difficult story. If this is something that might cause you distress, we understand completely if you choose to skip it. With that, this is Rock and Roll Archaeology. Strange days, indeed. At Monday breakfast, Yoko Ono reminded her husband of the Rolling Stone photo shoot scheduled for later that day. John sighed, made a bit of a face, and nodded. He then paid a visit to a local barber, returning with a swept-back ducktail cut reminiscent of his teddy boy days in Liverpool. A bit leaner, some gray at the temples, but with that new cut, he could almost pass for that 21-year-old guitar slinger on stage at the Cavern Club. He still had the Scouser accent, but these days he sprinkled in some American slang, a transatlantic patois, if you will, Lennonisms. Back at the Dakota, John quickly but politely navigated the small crowd of fans who were always, day and night, always on the sidewalk. As long as they didn't raise a fuss or block the arched entrance connecting the courtyard to West 72nd Street, the building staff tolerated them. Sean was up and around while Annie Leibovitz set up camera and lights in the master bedroom. John sat with his 5-year-old son, Sean, and watched cartoons. Outside, as Jude Stein approached, the big new guy with the big glasses waved excitedly. They'd met 2 days prior when he introduced himself as Mark, a Beatles fan from Hawaii. You just missed him. I missed him too. I was standing here reading. I had my head down like a dummy. And you missed seeing John the other night, Jude replied. She recounted with some satisfaction the events of Saturday night after Mark had left. John Lennon had stopped and chatted amiably for several minutes with Jude and her best friend, Jerry Mall. He remembered them by name. The two women met 4 years earlier on this very sidewalk. Bonded by their fandom, they became fast friends. Jude from Jersey and Jerry from Brooklyn. Whenever they would see a movie together or grab a bite to eat in the city, they would meet up first right here. Once the Rolling Stone photo shoot ended, Dave Sholin, a DJ for RKO Radio, was escorted into the Dakota. Over the next 3 hours, Sholin recorded a wide-ranging interview with John Lennon. They started with the new album, Double Fantasy. Then, the discussion really opened up. John talked about the early days, meeting Paul McCartney, how Paul brought George, and how George brought Ringo. Towards the end, their talk pivoted to John's family life at the Dakota. I hope to God I die before Yoko, John said at one point. I don't know what I'd do if she left before I did. As the winter sky began to darken outside, John wrapped up the interview. Who knows what's going to happen next? On the sidewalk, the vigil continued. Mark showed his newly purchased copy of Double Fantasy to Jude. A little before noon, a slight commotion at the entrance. Jude spotted John Lennon's personal secretary, Frederick Seaman, and pointed him out to Mark. Around the same time, a freelance photographer, Paul Goresh, showed up. Jude greeted him and they started chatting. Mark tried to inject himself into the conversation. Goresh detected an accent in the newcomer's speech. Mildly curious, he wondered aloud how someone from Hawaii acquired a southern drawl. He asked Mark, "Where you staying in New York?" A sudden flash of paranoia and anger. Mark got up in the photographer's face. What do you want to know that for?" Goresh quickly backed away. "Easy, man, easy. I was only making conversation." He walked off, muttering to himself, "Big dope, big damn dope." Mark offered to buy Jude lunch. She was a little shook by the interaction she'd just seen, but he was friendly enough and better dressed than most of the people who typically hung out in front of the Dakota. They went to the Dakota Grill just across the street. Mark picked a table by the window. He wanted to keep an eye on the apartment. It was unseasonably warm out for early December. The mid-afternoon temperature was comfortable under low clouds. A trim, middle-aged woman emerged from the Dakota. Helen Seaman, the family nanny, held the hand of a tiny child with large, dark eyes under a mop of shiny, dark brown hair. Jude greeted Helen and said a bright hello to Sean, but kept a respectful distance. Mark loomed impatiently behind her. Their lunch had been awkward, and they had been waiting in silence on the sidewalk for more than an hour now. Mark knelt down, extended a hand. "I came all the way across the ocean from Hawaii, and I'm honored to meet you." The boy just stared at him and sneezed. A Mercedes station wagon glided up to the curb. Helen quickly bundled her young charge into the back seat, and the car pulled away. At about 4:15, Jude decided to head home. Mark pleaded with her to stay. "He's bound to come out today. I've got a feeling about it," he entreated. He offered to take her out to a play or a movie. "Good luck getting his autograph," Jude answered. Mark watched her walk away until she disappeared from view. John strolled through the Dakota courtyard dressed simply for the evening. Jeans, a black sweater, and an unzipped leather jacket. Destination, the record plan for a mixdown session of Yoko's new song, Walking on Thin Ice. On the sidewalk, Mark awkwardly tried to make amends with Paul Goresh. The photographer still thought he was a big dope, but at length, Paul grudgingly accepted the apology. He noticed Mark was hugging his copy of Double Fantasy tightly to his chest. "Relax, man. Nobody's gonna steal your album around here." A new doorman had just started his shift. Jose Perdomo recognized Mark and gave him a quick hello. In Jose's estimation, the newcomer Mark was a harmless, talkative buffoon. Paul Goresh, on the other hand, was a real pest, someone to keep an eye on per Yoko's specific request. Laughing and chattering, the RKO radio team walked out of the archway. A limousine rolled up to the curb. Jose Perdomo sprang into action, opening doors, seeing them off. Mark stayed close by, watching the doorman work. Then Mark heard a familiar voice behind him. He wheeled around to see John Lennon and Yoko Ono coming out of the arch. Mark took a halting step backwards, dumbstruck, staring with his mouth open as John Lennon walked right past him to the curb. Strobes flashed as Paul Goresh snapped off photographs. He heard Jose apologize. This wasn't their limo. Theirs had yet to arrive. John said that was fine. Could he hail them a taxi instead? Another group came out, forming a semicircle around the famous couple. After some quick discussion, it was decided that John and Yoko would catch a ride with the RKO people. Yoko was already settling into the back seat. Mark felt a sharp nudge. It was Paul Goresh. "What the heck you waiting for, man? There he is." Mark Chapman stepped quickly up to John Lennon. No words. He just stuck out the album in a pen. John was used to this sort of thing, people freezing up in his presence. He briefly locked eyes with Mark, gave a small reassuring smile, then signed it. John Lennon, 1980. Goresh moved in, took a photo. John Lennon in profile, looking down as he signs. Mark Chapman, half out of frame, hovering nearby. "Is that all you want?" John asked him. Mark managed to nod. John Lennon turned and got into the limo next to his wife. At the record plant, John worked quickly, as was his habit. David Geffen dropped by in the early evening to share some news. 3 weeks after its release, Double Fantasy had achieved gold record status, $1 million in gross sales. John was relieved. After a 5-year hiatus, he had been unsure what kind of reception the new album would get. Around the same time, John's personal aide, Frederick Seaman, was dispatched back to the Dakota to fetch some cassette tapes. On his way back to the studio, he hurried past Paul Goresh. Frederick loathed the photographer. He kept walking while Paul tried to strike up a conversation. Mark was there too, and he showed off his signed album. Frederick forced a quick smile and kept moving. Driving back with the tapes at about 6:20 p.m., Frederick briefly recalled a phone conversation from that morning. He had spoken with Doug McDougal, John Lennon's bodyguard. A former FBI agent, Doug had been on leave of absence since September. He was going to meet with Yoko tomorrow to discuss coming back to work. Back at the record plant, John made a transatlantic call to Aunt Mimi in Liverpool. He'd been promising her a homecoming since 1975, and the time had finally come to make that happen. John admitted it to only a few people, but he got homesick sometimes watching ships leave New York Harbor. At about 8 p.m., Paul Goresh decided to pack it in. It had been several hours, and he knew from experience that meant John and Yoko were in the studio and would be coming back late. His decision was helped along by Mark, who pestered him endlessly about the photograph he had snapped earlier. "I'll give you $50 for it, man. Meet me here tomorrow, $50. As he crossed the street, the big dope kept calling him out, and Paul ignored him. Paul took a final look back as he drove away. Mark Chapman was pacing in and out of the shadows, head down, one hand clutching the album, the other deep in his coat pocket. John was satisfied with the night's work at the record plant. He had the engineer dub several cassettes to take home. On the way out, he signed an autograph for the receptionist. Yoko suggested stopping for dinner at the Stage Deli, but John wanted to get home in time to say goodnight to Sean. Chapman was posted up at an angle from the archway, on the wide sidewalk about halfway between the building and the street. He watched the light change at the corner of Central Park West and West 72nd Street. The limousine turned left and drew up to the curb. Yoko exited first. Chapman nodded at her from about 20 feet away. She did not return the nod. Chapman would later say John noticed him, gave a hard stare, turned, and kept walking. Yoko was already in the archway when Chapman sidestepped to the curb about 5 paces directly behind her husband. He called out softly, "Mr. Lennon." No response. From his coat pocket, Chapman produced a .38 caliber handgun, dropped into a two-handed combat stance, and fired 5 shots. Struck 4 times, John kept walking. He made it to the porter's vestibule just inside the courtyard before collapsing. He said to the duty porter, Jay Hastings, "I've been shot." Jay rang the automated alarm that connected with the police, then knelt beside John. He gently removed John's glasses and covered him with his porter's coat. Jose Perdomo ran up to Chapman, knocked the gun out of his hand and kicked it away. Through tears, he shouted, "You know what you done? Get out of here, man! Just get out of here!" The smell of gunfire filled the archway. Chapman could hear more screaming and shouting from the courtyard. He asked Jose Perdomo, "But where would I go?" Chapman took off his coat and hat. He didn't want the cops to think he was concealing a weapon. He leaned up against the brickwork of the Dakota, pulled out his paperback copy of Catcher in the Rye, and started reading. He had inscribed on the flyleaf, "This is my statement." Blessed by its proximity to Central Park, the Upper West Side is a decidedly upscale neighborhood. It's also densely populated, and the tall buildings create sharp echoes. Hearing gunfire out the window is not an uncommon thing. In his apartment, a block south, the TV reporter, Geraldo Rivera, heard 5 sharp cracks. Rivera had reported from war zones. He recognized the sound, coming from the direction of the Dakota, he surmised. Dr. Richard Marks, a cardiovascular surgeon at Roosevelt Hospital, also lived on the Upper West Side. He was headed home at the end of a long shift when he noticed the commotion at the Dakota. He immediately turned and rushed back to work. Residents of the Dakota and nearby buildings also heard gunshots, shouts, sirens growing closer. They were drawn, carefully at first, to their windows and then down to the street. The first police car arrived in under 2 minutes. NYPD officers Peter Cullen and Steve Spiro approached carefully, guns drawn. Cullen recognized Jose Perdomo and called out to him, "Jose, what's going on here?" Jose pointed to a tall, pudgy man standing off to one side, reading a paperback. Chapman. He shot John Lennon. Spiro wheeled and drew down on Chapman. Chapman dropped the book and threw his hands up.
"I'm unarmed. Please don't hurt me. Please don't let anybody hurt me."
Officer Cullen shouted at his partner to secure the subject and dashed into the archway. He found John in the porter's vestibule, face down in a spreading pool of blood. Officers Tony Palma and Herb Frauenberger rolled up. The suspect was in custody, and there was no time to call an ambulance. Spiro and Cullen led the handcuffed Chapman to the back of their radio car. Officer Frauenberger was a big guy, built like a weightlifter. He picked up John and gently placed him in the back of a third squad car manned by officers James Moran and Bill Gamble. With sirens screaming, they lit out for Roosevelt Hospital about a mile south. Outside the Dakota, handcuffed in the back of a police car, Mark Chapman could feel someone staring at him. He turned his head, and through the side window, he locked eyes with Yoko Ono. Dr. David Halloran, a third-year resident at Roosevelt, was making his rounds when his emergency pager went off. He ran to room 115, a surgical bay for incoming critical traumas. Lights blazing, a police car pulled up right outside. The patient was placed onto a gurney. Dr. Halloran made a quick assessment. 40-year-old male, not conscious, not breathing, 4 entry wounds, 3 exit wounds, no pulse, no pressure. In this situation, there's nothing to lose. Extreme measures are the only chance the patient has. Dr. Halloran performed an emergency thoracotomy. He made an incision to the patient's left side, spread the ribs, and began directly massaging the heart. In minutes, he was joined by Dr. Richard Marks, the surgeon who had rushed back from his homeward commute. Dr. Marks further assessed the damage. Dr. Halloran held John Lennon's heart in his hands and kept pumping. As the trauma team worked frantically, the hospital sound system was gently playing "All My Loving," the song the Beatles opened with when they made history on the Ed Sullivan Show back in 1964. The heart was largely intact, but the damage to the vessels was catastrophic. 20 minutes of aggressive intervention failed to restore pulse. Reluctantly, they had to call it. Time of death, 11:15 p.m. It fell to Dr. Stephen Lynn, head of the emergency department at Roosevelt, to inform the patient's wife. Dr. Lynn found Yoko Ono in a small private waiting room. He delivered the news. Her first reaction was denial, an agonized wail of disbelief. Then, slowly at first, acceptance. Composing herself, Yoko quietly made one simple, urgent request of Dr. Lynn. Delay the public announcement for as long as you can. She did not want her 5-year-old son, Sean, to learn of his father's death from a television screen. Dr. Lynn tried to keep his promise, but a story of this magnitude cannot be contained. By sheer coincidence, Alan Weiss, a news producer for WABC TV, was already in the Roosevelt emergency room lying on a gurney. An hour earlier, he'd had an accident on his motorcycle riding through Central Park. Now he was waiting for x-rays, his ears still ringing from the impact. His eyes were closed when 2 police officers stopped beside him. He heard one say to the other, "Can you believe it? John Lennon." Alan's mind raced. With the enormity of the news, his own injured state, he questioned what he'd just heard. His journalistic training took over. I need confirmation. From his gurney, he started asking questions. He even slipped a 20 to a janitor. "Find a payphone, call my assistant editor for me." The call was never made, but a few minutes later, Alan Weiss got his terrible confirmation. He recognized Yoko Ono sobbing on the arm of a police officer as she was led down the hall. Dizzy and hurting from his injuries and from the devastating news, Alan found a payphone and made the call himself. The information rocketed through the ABC News system. It landed just minutes later in a production truck outside Miami's Orange Bowl Stadium. Monday Night Football producer Bob Goodrich picked up the phone, took in the news, asked for, and received confirmation. Goodrich then called his boss, the network's head of news and sports, Roone Ulrich, asking for guidance. In the broadcast booth, Frank Gifford was calling the play-by-play. The Miami Dolphins and the New England Patriots were locked in a 13-13 tie with under a minute to go. Through his earpiece, Gifford heard the frantic, parallel conversation between his producer in the truck and the executive in New York. While calling the game, he was also absorbing the horrific news. With 40 seconds left on the game clock, Miami called a timeout. The broadcast would cut away for exactly 1 minute before returning to live game action. 1 minute. Gifford had 1 minute to relay what he had just learned to his partner in the booth, Howard Cosell. They then had to strategize quickly how to break the news to over 20 million viewers. The following off-air recording captures that exchange, mere seconds before they went back on the air.
He was shot outside his apartment, the Dakota apartment building. Fellas, I just don't know. I'd like your opinion. I can see this game situation allowing for that news flash. Can you?
Absolutely, I can see it. You can? You betcha. You got to. We know it. We've got to do it.
All right.
Back on the air, as New England lined up for the kick, Frank Gifford set the stage, and Howard Cosell broke the news.
John Smith is on the line, and I don't care what's on the line, Howard. You had got to say what we know in the booth.
Yes, we have to say it. Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that news flash.
The crowd began to gather almost immediately. First, the locals who had heard the sirens. Then, as the news spread, a steady pilgrimage began. By midnight, the crowd had grown to several hundred. By 1 a.m, 1,000 people stood outside in a state of collective shock. They came from other boroughs, over the bridges and through the tunnels. Some were crying, many stood mute. Cars were double parked for blocks as people left their vehicles to join the vigil on foot. Luis Fonseca was in his car in Brooklyn when he heard the news. He drove directly to the hospital and then to the Dakota.
I just wanted to be here,
he told the New York Times reporter. All through the night and into the days that followed, the crowd grew. It culminated the following Sunday. A vast crowd, 100,000 strong, gathered in Central Park. At 2 p.m., a city, a nation, a planet, went silent for 10 minutes. In the midst of that vast, quiet crowd, a young man held up a simple handmade sign. It showed a picture of John Lennon flanked by peace symbols. Underneath, in big block letters, why? Sean wanted to know why all those people were outside. Sunk deep in her grief, Yoko had taken to her room. She asked the nanny to bring the boy to her bedside. She broke the news simply and directly to Sean.
Now Daddy is part of God,
Sean told his mother.
I guess when you die, you become much bigger because you're part of everything.
We search for a reason or a lesson. We see that handmade sign in the park and we ask the same question, why? But there was no covert conspiracy, no complex political move. There is no why. just the pathetic reality of a man desperate to steal fame that he could not earn. A nihilistic quest that culminated with an act of empty, violent narcissism. So what is left when the meaning we search for isn't there? How do we confront such chaos? All that is left is a simple human response: to be kind, to answer the chaos, not with more noise, but with small, quiet acts of peace. And for a moment in Central Park on that Sunday, for the 100,000 and the multitudes around the world thinking about that moment themselves, there were many acts of peace.
So this is Christmas, and what have you done? Another year over, and you won't just begun. And so this is Christmas.
I'm Christian Swain, and this has been Rock and Roll Archaeology on Pantheon Media. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Let's hope it's a good one without any fear. Keep up the rockin'.
Rock and Roll Archaeology is hosted and produced by Christian Swain. Story by Christian Swain and Richard Evans. Written by Richard Evans. Sound design and incidental music by Jerry Danielson. If you want to reach us, rockandrollarchaeology.com has links to all of our socials. If you'd like an ad-free version, visit our Patreon page. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved. This presentation is education and commentary, consistent with the fair use provisions of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.